I have been a cargo manifest inspector for 11 years, and in that time I have logged a great many things I did not expect to find. Loose livestock in a sealed nutrition bay. Contraband pressed flat between sheets of insulating foil and relabeled as survey equipment. A man sleeping inside a crate of industrial synth mesh who claimed, when the crate was opened at Raich Station, that he had simply lost track of time. I have a folder of incident annotations that my old supervisor described as the most deadpan documentation of the genuinely inexplicable she had ever read. I say all of this so you understand that when I found the child in the cold storage corridor of the care of SOAR, I was not the sort of person who panics. I was the sort of person who looks at a thing, identifies what it is, and writes it down. What I found was this: a small alien girl sitting cross-legged on a cargo pallet in corridor C7, between a rack of sealed biological transfer units and a stack of survey equipment bound for the Marin processing hub. She was waist height, or would have been if she were standing. Her skin was a pale gray-white, smooth and without markings, the color of old birch bark. Her hair was silver, fine, and it floated slightly in the corridor recycled air as though it weighed almost nothing. Her eyes were large and amber, the pupils wide in the corridor low light, and she was looking at me with an expression I would come to think of as her standard expression. A careful, assessing patience, as though she were prepared to wait for me to catch up to whatever she had already understood. She wore a child dress, pale blue fabric with small embroidered trim at the collar, the kind that suggests a family that takes care of its things. The dress was not damaged, she was not injured, she was not crying. She was sitting on a cargo pallet in a cold storage corridor at 3:40 ship time, watching me with those amber eyes, and that was all I had. I checked the corridor behind me, empty. I checked the corridor ahead, empty. I pulled up my manifest tablet and scrolled through the active inventory for C7 and the adjacent bays. No entry for a living person, no passenger manifest crosscheck flag, no biosign transit authorization attached to any item in this corridor. I looked at the child looked at me. I wrote Manifest Item 7 Alpha, living person, alien Vel-Marin phenotype, estimated juvenile unaccompanied. Location, corridor C7, pallet position 7. Time of discovery, 3:41 ship time, day 14 of transit. Condition, uninjured, alert present, no accompanying documentation, pending classification review. I wrote it down before I went to get anyone else, because that is what you do when you find something in a cargo hold. You log it before it moves. You log it before the situation changes. You log it before someone tells you what it is, because what it is and what it officially becomes are sometimes two different things. And the manifest entry is the one record that catches what it actually was at the moment of first contact. I did not know yet how important that would turn out to be. I flagged the entry as priority, pocketed my tablet, and crouched down to the child eye level. She watched me do this without moving, without leaning away, with that same careful patience she had used to watch the empty corridor before I arrived. "Do you speak standard?" I asked. She considered the question, as though it were genuinely interesting. Then she said, in a careful, slightly formal standard that suggested she had learned it from someone who chose their words with deliberateness, "Yes, my mother taught me." "What is your name?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, not evasive, processing. "Save," she said. "My name is Save." "Save," I said. "I am Marin. I am the person who checks what is in this part of the ship. Can you tell me how you got into this corridor?" She thought about that with the same full attention she brought to everything. Then she said, "I was with my mother in the other corridor, and then I was here." That was, as it turned out, a more precise description of events than I would fully understand for another 6 hours. I brought her to the inspector station. It is not a large room. A desk, a terminal, a wall of filing ports, a narrow cot that folds out from the bulkhead for the longer transit legs when I sleep between shifts. I folded out the cot and found a thermal blanket in the supply locker and told Save she could sit on it. She sat on it. She pulled the blanket around her shoulders with a focused deliberateness, like someone who knows how to take care of herself and prefers to. She looked around the room with the methodical attention of someone conducting an inventory of her new situation. And when she had finished, she folded her hands in her lap and was still. I gave her a ration bar from the emergency supply. She took it, examined the packaging with interest, opened it precisely along the seam, and ate it in small, careful bites. Then I went to the intercom and called the night supervisor. Fetch Commander Audrin Vass arrived in the inspector station 12 minutes later. He was a large man, angular in the way of someone who has worked long-haul freight transit his whole career. And he came through the door with the expression of a supervisor roused at 400, who is prepared to be irritated by whatever caused it. He looked at me, looked at the child on the cot, and his expression did something I could not immediately categorize. It passed through irritation and came out the other side into something quieter and more careful. "Where did you find her?" he said. "Corridor C7, pallet position 7. She was sitting on the pallet when I came through on the 340 check. No biosign alert. The corridor sensors logged a biosign at 3:37. I was already in C7 by then." He looked at the child again. She was watching him the way she had watched me, that patient amber gaze, measuring and unhurried. "Has she said anything?" "Her name is Save. She says she was in another corridor with her mother, and then she was here." Something shifted in Vass' face. He took a breath and said he needed to wait here, then left. He was gone for 22 minutes. When he came back, he had the ship biology technician with him, a young man named Rail who looked like he had also been woken abruptly, and was managing it with somewhat less composure than Vass. Rail ran a standard bioscan on the child from the doorway, which the child permitted without comment. Watching the scanner with the same methodical interest she had brought to the ration bar wrapper. He looked at his results, he looked at Vass, he looked at his results again. "She is identical," he said, "down to the genetic level. Same phenotype markers, same cell structure, same everything." "Identical to what?" I said. Vass looked at me. "There is a Vel Marin family in the passenger section," he said. "A mother and a daughter traveling to the Marin processing hub. The daughter name is Save." He paused. "The daughter is currently asleep in the passenger cabin with her mother. We have confirmed it." I looked at the child on the cot. The child looked back at me, waiting. "Then who is this?" I said. "That," said Vass, "is what I am going to explain." The explanation took a while. The short version, as Rail gave it, was this. Somewhere in the freight corridor network of the care of SOAR, there was a spatial irregularity. A fold in the transit field that the ship engineers had logged as a minor anomaly 2 days ago, and flagged for review at the next port call. The fold was in the biological transfer corridor, C7 adjacent. When the passenger section child, Save, had wandered into that section of the ship sometime during the night, she had passed through the edge of the anomaly. The anomaly had done what such anomalies rarely do. It had produced a duplicate. Not a copy in any mechanical sense. A living biological duplicate, complete down to the cell. The original Save had been returned to the passenger section through the fold reversion, still asleep, apparently unaware that anything had happened. The duplicate had been sitting on the cargo pallet in corridor C7. "A duplicate," I said. "A biological duplicate," Rail said. He had the look of someone who found this professionally extraordinary and was working to suppress it in the current context. "Living, fully formed. Her biosigns are identical to the original in every measurable way. Neural patterns, cellular age markers. I would need a full sequencing to find any divergence, and I am not certain I would. I looked at the child on the cot. She had finished the ration bar. She was holding the wrapper folded small in her hands, looking at it with interest, turning it slowly over. She is aware, I said. She speaks. She answered my questions. She knows her name. Yes, said Rael. By every biological measure I have, she is a living child. Then I do not see the problem, I said. Vass looked at me steadily. The problem, he said, with the patience of a man who has decided to explain something he would rather not have to explain, is that she does not exist in any registry. She has no transit record, no house registration, no legal standing under compact transit code. She emerged from a spatial anomaly in a freight corridor. Under the code, an unregistered biological entity discovered in freight transit is classified as an unregistered biological artifact, pending academic review and classification. The child on the cot had gone very still. She was not looking at the wrapper anymore. She was looking at Vass with that steady amber gaze, taking the measure of him. She is not an artifact, I said. I have already logged her, I said. I pulled out my manifest tablet and held it up. Manifest Item 7 Alpha, living person, alien, Velmarin phenotype, estimated juvenile unaccompanied, logged at 3:41 ship time, day 14 of transit. Vass looked at the tablet. He looked at me. His expression was not angry. It was the expression of a man who has just realized that a situation he thought he could manage in a particular direction has already moved before he arrived. You will need to amend that entry, he said. I will not, I said. There was a silence in the station. Rael looked at the wall. Solis Vass said, I am giving you a direct operational order. And I am telling you that I logged what I found at the moment of discovery, before I had any context, and the entry is accurate. She was alive when I found her. She is alive now. A manifest entry that logs a living child as a living person is not a clerical error. It is a correct record. It is not a question of accuracy in that sense, he said. Then what is it a question of, I said. Vass set his jaw. He looked again at the child, who was watching this exchange with what I can only describe as professional attention. He said he was going to need to escalate this. Escalate it, I said. While you do, she stays here. I have filed a continuity of manifest integrity challenge under Transit Code Section 3. You know what that does. He knew. Section 3 freezes a disputed manifest entry for 72 hours pending review by the Compact Freight Arbitration System. During the freeze, no entry can be amended, transferred, or reclassified without arbitration sign-off. The provision was designed to prevent the destruction or rerouting of disputed cargo during active transit. It had never, to my knowledge, been applied to a living child. There is a first time for everything. Vass left. Rael lingered for a moment at the door, opened his mouth as though he were going to say something professional, thought better of it, and left. I sat down in the chair across from the cot. Save was watching me. What is an artifact, she said. It means an object, I said, something made rather than someone alive. She considered this. She turned the ration bar wrapper over in her hands again, that small, methodical movement. I was not made, she said. I came from the fold. I know, I said. That is why the entry stays as it is. She looked at the thermal blanket around her shoulders and smoothed a corner of it with her palm. A small, precise stroke. Will I go with my mother, she said. That was the question I did not yet have an answer to. The mother in the passenger section did not yet know this child existed. I did not know how she would receive that news, or what the arbitration system would say, or what the 72 hours ahead would produce. I do not know yet, I said, but you are staying here until I do. She nodded. It was the nod of someone who has assessed the current arrangement, found it to be the best available option, and decided to accept it without complaint. I turned back to my terminal and started reading the compact transit code from the beginning. 11 years in manifest work, and I had read the code perhaps 100 times. I knew its rhythms. I knew where the language tightened into hard precision and where it went soft enough that a line supervisor could steer a finding in the direction he preferred. I was looking now for the specific language around biological duplicate events, which the code did not directly address, because biological duplicate events were rare enough to have been treated, historically, as theoretical rather than operational problems. What I found instead in Section 14, subsection G, was the continuity provision. The language was originally written to address organ transit events, cases where a biological sample became separated from its transit documentation and had to be rematched to its correct registry entry. But the provision was broader in its wording than its original application. It said, where a living biological entity is entered in a manifest as a living person by an authorized inspector at the moment of discovery, and that entry is not amended within the discovery window, the entry constitutes the formal identification record for the purposes of transit law, and the legal standing for the duration of transit shall be determined by reference to the closest registered individual sharing biological continuity. Biological continuity. The child in this room was, by every measure Rail had taken, biologically identical to the registered save in the passenger section. Same genetic markers, same phenotype, same cell structure. The original save was registered. She had a house name, a transit record, a mother with documentation. Under Section 14G, this child legal standing for the duration of transit derived from that registration. She was not an artifact. She was not an unclassified biological entity pending academic review. She was, under the continuity provision, the same person as the registered child in the passenger section for the purposes of transit law. And the entry that said so was already filed and frozen. I read it 3 more times to be certain I had it right. Then I wrote up the formal challenge amendment, attached the Section 14G text with the relevant language highlighted, noted the precedent gap and the plain language reading of the provision, and filed it to the Compact Living Persons Arbitration Office. They had 72 hours under the Section 3 freeze to respond. Then I made 2 cups of grain drink from the station's small heater. The kind that is mostly hot water with a powder packet, the kind you drink for warmth rather than flavor. I put one in front of Save. She looked at it. She picked it up with both hands around the cup and took a small, careful sip. "It is not very good," she said. "No," I said, "it is not." She drank it anyway, with the same focused thoroughness she brought to everything. The first 12 hours were quiet. Save slept, which surprised me. A deep, settled sleep on the narrow cot, with the thermal blanket pulled to her chin. I have thought about that sleep many times since. She had been in existence for less than a day. She was in a small room on a ship she had not chosen to be on, in the care of a stranger, with her legal standing under active dispute by people who wanted to reclassify her as cargo. And she slept like someone who had made an assessment of the current situation, decided the problem was being handled by the correct person, and determined that rest was the appropriate response. I sat at my terminal and read the code and annotated the challenge filing, and drank the rest of the grain drink and listened to the hum of the ship systems, and occasionally to her breathe. Vass came back at 900. He had a different expression now, more careful and more closed. He had been on the relay with someone at the Charter Authority legal offices, I suspected. The Charter Authority legal team is reviewing the filing, he said. Good, I said. They have significant reservation about the applicability of the continuity provision in this case. They are welcome to make that argument to the arbitration office, I said. He looked at the child on the cot. She was awake, sitting with her knees drawn up, watching us both with that measuring attention. He lowered his voice, though the station was small enough that lowering it made little real difference. The Charter Authority is concerned about precedent, he said. If a biological duplicate is logged as a person and the continuity provision is applied, it creates an obligation, a liability. Not just for this case, but for every anomalous event that produces a living duplicate anywhere in the freight corridor system. It creates a person, I said. He looked at me. He was not a bad man, Audrin Vass. He was a man who had worked long-haul freight transit for 20 years and understood that the law in practice is a set of tools that institutional entities use to manage outcomes, and that outcomes must be managed in the direction of institutional stability. He believed this not from malice but from long experience of what happens when outcomes are not managed. He was explaining this to me because he genuinely believed I had not yet understood the full picture. I logged what I found, I said. She was alive when I found her. She answered my questions. She told me her name. She has been sitting in this room for 9 hours being patient and eating ration bars. And she is a child, and I will not amend the entry to say she is something different from what she is. The Charter Authority can appeal the arbitration filing, I said. That is their right under the code. But the entry stays and she stays here, and those two facts are not changing. He looked at me for a long moment, then he nodded once and left. Save said from the cot, he is not pleased with you. No, I said. Are you in trouble, she asked. Probably a little, I said. It will not change anything. She pulled the blanket tighter. She looked at the wall for a moment. Then she said, my mother will be worried, the other mother. She worries when she cannot account for where I am. I thought about the original Save asleep in the passenger cabin, waking to her mother hands, not knowing she had been anywhere. I thought about the specific strangeness of being a child, whose existence was an administrative dispute being resolved 3 corridors away. She will know soon, I said. Vass will have to tell her. Save considered this. What will she say, she asked. I do not know, I said honestly. But she is your mother, or the closest thing to it that language has a word for. Whatever she says, she will not say it unkindly. The second day brought the Charter Authority legal team into the relay channel in force. They filed 3 questions to the arbitration office, challenging the jurisdiction of the Section 3 freeze, the applicability of the continuity provision, and the authority of the inspector charter to make a living person entry under the specific circumstances of this case. Each question was competent. Each was written by someone who understood the code and was looking methodically for the gap between what the law said and what it had been written to address. I had already found that gap. I had also found that the gap closed once you read the provision in its plain language rather than in its original legislative context. The original Save mother, Vitsaru, was brought into the situation at hour 28 by the medical officer with careful pacing. She had received the information with a stillness that I found, when I heard the account, entirely unsurprising given what I had seen of her daughter. She had asked 3 questions, each precise and specific. She had then asked to see the child. I brought Save to the medical bay. Vitsaru was waiting. She was a woman of perhaps 40, Velmarin, with the same pale gray skin and silver hair as her daughter, and a composure that had the quality of something built over time, through deliberate effort rather than come by naturally. She stood when we came through the door. The two of them looked at each other. It was a long moment. I stood at the door and did not say anything because there was nothing useful to say. What was in that room was not something that benefited from commentary. Vitsaru said in standard, her voice entirely level, "You have her eyes." Save said, "I know." Vitsaru did not move toward her. She stood and looked at the child with the expression of someone confronting a thing that does not yet have a category, trying to decide what kind of understanding to build for it. "Are you afraid?" she said. Save thought about this carefully, with her full attention. "No," she said. "The inspector said the entry stays." Vitsaru looked at me then, a long, direct look. Not hostile, not yet warm, carrying the weight of a woman who has not finished deciding what I am in relation to this situation. "The entry stays," I said. She held the look a moment longer. Then she said, to me rather than to Save, "My daughter, the other, she has been asking about the corridor. She knows something happened in the night." "What have you told her?" I asked. "Nothing yet." She looked back at Save. "I do not know yet what the right words are." That seemed honest. I said, "You have time. The freeze runs another 44 hours. She nodded. Then she looked at Save again and something in her face shifted. Not breaking but moving, the way ice moves at the edge of a thaw. When the temperature has changed, and the change is real, but the form has not yet fully given way. "Are you hungry?" she said. Save said yes. So Vitsaru fed her, from the passenger section meal she had brought down in a covered container. Proper food, the kind a mother packs for a transit leg because she has done this before, and knows what is available in the inspector station, and finds it insufficient for a child. Save ate with the same focused thoroughness she brought to everything. Vitsaru watched her eat with an expression I did not try to read precisely, because it was not mine to read. I went back to the inspector station. The Charter Authority formal counterargument arrived at hour 58. It was 8 paragraphs, competently assembled and argued on 3 grounds. First, that the continuity provision was drafted for organ transit events and lacked any legislative intent applicable to biological duplicates. Second, that the manifest entry constituted a good-faith clerical error, made under conditions of genuine informational incompleteness. Third, that the inspector refusal to amend the entry upon receiving a direct operational order constituted an irregularity exceeding her authority under the inspector charter. The third argument was the one they believed in. The first 2 were scaffolding. I filed my response at hour 61. I kept it to 2 paragraphs. The continuity provision says what it says, and what it says is not bounded by its legislative history. The entity was living at the moment of discovery and is living now. Biological continuity is present and confirmed. An accurate entry made by an authorized inspector at the moment of discovery, before any administrative context was available to inform it, cannot be a clerical error. A clerical error is an inaccuracy, and this entry is accurate. The inspector authority to make and maintain accurate manifest entries is the core function of the inspector charter, not an exceedance of it. I sent it and went to check on Save. She was in the medical bay again with Vitsaru. They were sitting on the examination table side by side, not speaking. The way people sit when words have been used up for the time being, but proximity still matters. The original Save was somewhere else on the ship. One of the junior crew had volunteered to take her to the observation lounge, which has a viewport looking into the transit field and tends to keep children occupied without effort. I came to the doorway. "The arbitration office will respond within the next 12 hours, I said. Vitsaru looked up. "Either way," she said. "Either way," I said. "The freeze lifts at hour 72 regardless. Before it does, they will have ruled." She nodded. Save looked at me from the examination table. What do you think they will say? She asked. I think the provision says what it says, I said. And I think what it says is that you are a person. Save held this for a moment. Then she said, what happens if they say you are wrong? I had thought about this. Then I file an appeal, I said, which extends the freeze another 48 hours under Section 3, subsection D. And during those 48 hours, nothing changes. And after the 48 hours, she asked. We find the next provision, I said. There is always a next provision, if you read the code carefully enough and you are willing to keep reading. Vitsaru made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of someone who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has been told by a stranger something that is simultaneously absurd and completely reliable. And the combination is what produced the sound. You read the code, she said. For 11 years, I said, it is what I do. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, sit down, Inspector. You have been standing in doorways for 2 days. I sat down. We sat together in the medical bay for a while. Vitsaru on one side of the table, Save beside her, and me in the chair by the door. Nobody said very much. There was not a great deal to say that had not already been said. The freeze was running. The arbitration office was reviewing. The Charter Authority legal team was almost certainly drafting something additional. None of that required my attention at this particular moment. What was in front of me was a mother and a child who were not quite mother and child in any way. The law had words for yet. Sitting together on an examination table on a freight hauler in deep transit. And I did not have words for that arrangement either. So I sat down and was quiet and let it be what it was. Save looked at me at one point and said, you have been awake for a long time. I have, I said. You should sleep, she said. The code will still be there when you wake up. Vitsaru's expression shifted slightly in a way that was not a smile, but was adjacent to one. I went back to the inspector's station and slept for 4 hours. When I woke, the station was quiet and Save cot was occupied. She had come back on her own at some point and folded the blanket neatly at the foot of the cot, and was sitting on top of it, reading something on a tablet I had left on the desk. She looked up when I sat up. I borrowed it, she said, the Transit Regulation Summary. I hope that is acceptable. It is fine, I said. She went back to reading it. I watched her for a moment. This child who had been in existence for less than 2 days and had already decided the most useful thing she could do with her time was read the transit code. And then I got up and made more grain drink. The Compact Living Persons Arbitration Office sent their preliminary finding at hour 68. I read it twice at my terminal in the inspector's station at 200 ship time, with the station quiet and Save asleep on the cot behind me. The finding was 4 paragraphs. The first established jurisdiction. The second addressed the Charter Authority legislative intent argument and disposed of it. The provision language is not bounded by its original application, and the plain meaning of biological continuity encompasses a biological duplicate. The third addressed the clerical error argument and disposed of it. An entry made by an authorized inspector at the moment of discovery, before any administrative context was available to inform it, cannot be a clerical error as it is accurate. The fourth paragraph was the ruling. The manifest entry stands. The continuity provision applies. The entity designated Manifest Item 7 Alpha holds legal standing for transit purposes. By reference to the registered individual sharing, confirmed biological continuity. I sat with that for a few minutes, then I went and woke Save. She came awake the way she did everything, present immediately, eyes open, focused. She sat up and pulled the blanket around her shoulders and waited. The arbitration office has ruled, I said. She waited. The entry stands, I said. You are a person under transit law. You will disembark with Veet Saru at the processing hub. The office is issuing a transit completion record in your name. Save was very still for a moment. The entry stands, she said. The way you say something when you are confirming it in your own record, as well as acknowledging it in someone else. Yes, I said. She looked at the wall for a moment, then she looked at me. Thank you for writing me down, she said. I looked at her, this child who had existed for less than 3 days, who had held herself together in a small room on a strange ship, with a patience and self-possession that I had found, across 68 hours, quietly extraordinary, who had eaten ration bars and grain drink without complaint, and asked careful questions, and listened to the answers with full attention, who had borrowed the transit regulation summary and read it while I slept, because that was the kind of person she was, who had sat on an examination table beside a woman who was, and was not her mother, and found in that complicated nearness something that was not nothing. You were there to be written, I said. She considered this with her full attention. Then she nodded, turned, and lay back down on the cot. In 2 minutes she was asleep again. I went back to the terminal and filed the formal notification to VAS, and attached the arbitration office ruling and sent it to the charter authority. At 1400 on day 16, the Care of SOAR docked at the Marin processing hub. I stood at the freight section corridor junction and watched Veet Saru come through, with the original save on one side and the duplicate save on the other. They were the same height. They had the same silver hair, the same pale gray skin, the same amber eyes and careful, deliberate walk. They were looking at each other sideways, not wary, not afraid. But the way you look at something you do not yet have a word for and are not rushing to name. 2 children working out what they were to each other, in the language available to them, at the pace that felt right. I watched them walk through the docking corridor and through the gate. The charter authority filed a formal notice of operational irregularity against my inspector, number the same afternoon. I read it, noted the reference number, filed it in the appropriate folder. These things run their course. The arbitration office finding had superseded their counterargument, and they knew it. The notice was a way of registering their institutional position, which is their right under the code, and which I respected without particularly caring about it. I filed the final manifest annotation for the Care of SOAR Day 14 through 16 transit window. Manifest Item 7 Alpha, Living Person, Vel Marin Juvenile Save. Disembarked at Marin Processing Hub, Day 16, 1400 ship time. Transit completion, record issued by Compact Living Persons Arbitration Office. Entry confirmed by case reference 7 Alpha/Care of SOAR. No amendment required, no amendment made. Then I closed the manifest and started reading the one for the next leg. The notice of operational irregularity was reviewed by the Charter Authority Compliance Board 4 months later. They found that the inspector had acted within her authority under the inspector charter, that the Section 3 challenge had been properly filed, and that the arbitration office ruling superseded the counterargument in its entirety. The notice was dismissed without annotation to my inspector record. The Compact Living Persons Arbitration Office issued a formal policy protocol 8 months after the Care of SOAR incident. It is called the Biological Continuity Living Person Protocol, and it establishes the procedure for handling living duplicate entities discovered in freight transit. Its first sentence reads, "A living entity once entered in a manifest as a living person by an authorized inspector at the moment of discovery shall be treated as a living person for all purposes of transit law." I read that sentence when the protocol was published and I thought, that is what the code already said. It just needed someone to say it out loud in a specific case about a specific child. In a specific freight corridor at 3:41 ship time on day 14 of a transit run. Before anyone told her what she was or was not. I have heard from Vitsara once since then, a relay message, brief and precise. It said that both of them were well. That the younger Save, she used a Vel Marin word, which she translated in a footnote as something like Echo who became first. The shadow that is now its own origin, had enrolled in a settlement apprenticeship program at the hub. That she had shown a particular facility for registration systems work, which Vitsara thought I might find fitting. I did find it fitting. I found it exactly right, in the way that things are sometimes exactly right. And you do not need to add anything to them. I have a manifest entry saved on a personal drive that I keep separate from the official filing. It is manifest item 7 alpha from the care of SOAR, day 14, logged at 3:41 ship time. The original entry, in the form I wrote it when I crouched down in corridor C7, and found a small alien girl sitting on a cargo pallet, watching me with those amber eyes, waiting with complete patience to see what I was going to do. Living person, alien Vel Marin phenotype, estimated juvenile unaccompanied. Condition, uninjured alert present. That is what she was when I found her. That is what the entry will always say. Because I wrote it before anyone told me it was inconvenient. And because the manifest entry is the record of what a thing is at the moment it is found. And she was real at that moment, and she has been real every moment since. You count what is there, you write it down. You do not amend the number, because the number is difficult. That is the whole job. That is all it ever was. The hours between that meal and the counterargument filing were the quietest of the whole 72. Save came back to the inspector station on her own. I heard her footsteps in the corridor and looked up from the terminal, and she was in the doorway, still carrying the blanket around her shoulders like a cloak, watching me work. I have a chair, I said. She came in and sat in it. She watched me read the code for a while without speaking. She had the gift, rare in anyone and unusual in a child, of being present in a room without requiring the room to acknowledge her. She did not fidget. She did not ask questions. She simply sat, and the station was quiet around us both, and I read, and she watched me read. After perhaps 20 minutes she said, "What are you looking for now?" "A second provision," I said, "in case the first one is not enough." She considered this. "You think it might not be enough?" "I think it is," I said, "but I would rather have 2 than 1. She nodded slowly. "That is what my mother does," she said, "when she is planning something difficult. She finds more than one way to do it, so if the first way does not work, she does not have to start over from nothing." "Your mother sounds like a careful person," I said. "She is," Save said. She paused. "Both of them are." I looked at her. She was looking at the wall at some middle distance, her expression doing something complicated and quiet. I did not say anything. There was nothing useful to say about that particular thing. What she was doing was the work of figuring out what she was, and where she stood, and how the words applied to her situation, and that work is not something another person can help with. You can only wait near it and let the person do it at their own pace. After a while she said, "Do you think she knows I exist, the other one?" "I do not know," I said. "She may have felt something. Children sometimes do when something that shares their shape has entered the world, or she may simply know that something changed without knowing what." Save turned this over. "Does it frighten you," she asked, "what I am?" "No," I said. She looked at me directly. "Why not?" "Because I found you in corridor C7, and you told me your name," I said. "That is enough to know what you are." She held my gaze for a moment with those amber eyes. Then she turned back to the middle distance and was quiet again, and I went back to the code. I found a second provision in Section 9, subsection B, concerning the rights of individuals in transit whose status is under active arbitration review. It was narrower than 14G and would have served only as a holding measure, but it was there. I noted it and kept reading. At some point in the small hours, Save fell asleep in the chair. I folded out the cot and moved her to it without waking her. She was light. She settled onto the cot without stirring, still wrapped in the blanket, and I covered the edge of it over her and went back to the terminal. I have been asked since whether I had doubts during those 68 hours. Whether there was a moment when I looked at the legal landscape and thought the charter authority might be right, or when I considered that the cleanest resolution for everyone, including the child, might be a different one. The honest answer is no. Not because I was certain the arbitration office would rule as I hoped, but because the entry was accurate regardless of how they ruled. She was alive when I found her. The entry said she was alive. Those two things did not change based on what the office decided. What the office decided was whether the law would catch up to the fact, and that was out of my hands. My job was to make sure the fact was correctly recorded and correctly defended until the law had time to respond. That is all the job ever is in the end. You record what is real. You defend the record, you wait. That night after I sent the filing and before I slept, Veet Saru appeared in the inspector station doorway. She had not knocked. She stood there for a moment looking at Save asleep on the cot, and then she looked at me. "You have not left the station in 2 days," she said. "I leave to check on her," I said. "You leave to check on her," she said, "and when you are here you read the code." "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I want to understand something, not about the law, about you." "All right," I said. "You found her before you knew what she was," she said. "You logged her before anyone told you to. You filed the challenge before anyone gave you a reason to. I want to understand why you did not wait. Why you did not see what the situation was first, and then decide." I looked at the tablet on the desk. I thought about how to say it accurately. "Because what she was in the corridor at 3:41 is what she is," I said. "What the situation turned out to be did not change that. If I had waited to log her until I knew what she was, the entry would have been written by someone who already had a conclusion. That is not a manifest entry. That is a decision dressed as a record." Veet Saru was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You knew she was real before you knew what she was." "Yes," I said. She looked at Save again, at the small shape under the thermal blanket, silver hair spread out across the cot surface. "She has been asking me," she said quietly, "what she should call me, whether I am her mother. I do not know yet what to tell her. I did not know either, so I did not say anything. What I can tell you," Veet Saru said, still looking at Save, "is that when I came into that room and she looked at me, I recognized the look. It is the same look my daughter gives me when she is waiting to see if I am going to make a decision she agrees with. She has given me that look since she was very small. I had not expected to see it on another face." She turned away from the doorway then and went back down the corridor, and I sat with what she had said for a while before I went back to the code. There is no provision in the compact transit law for what Veet Saru was working out in those 68 hours. The law addressed Save's status. It did not address Veet Saru's situation, which was the situation of a person who had arrived in a system with one daughter and was leaving it with two, and had not been given any vocabulary for what that meant. That work was hers to do in the time available with the specific materials of her own heart. She did it, as far as I could tell, with the same careful deliberateness her daughter brought to everything. The morning of day 16, the last morning before docking, Save came to find me on the manifest deck during my 600 check. I was working through the outbound load confirmations for the processing hub transfer, routine work, the kind of cross-referencing that requires attention but not thought, and I heard her footsteps and looked up. She had changed into the same pale blue dress, but someone, Veet Saru I assumed, had pressed it smooth and replaced a loose thread at the collar. She looked, if anything, more composed than she had when I found her on the pallet 4 days earlier, which was itself a notable achievement. She had a piece of paper in her hand, folded twice. She held it out to me. I took it and unfolded it. It was a transit regulation summary, handwritten, covering Section 3, Section 9, Subsection B, and Section 14, Subsection G, in precise small script. At the bottom, in the same hand, a single line, in case you need them again. I looked at the page for a moment, then I looked at her. I thought about the copies I keep, I said, the ones on the personal drive. She said, those are your copies, these are mine. She paused. I thought you should have both versions, in case one is lost. I folded the paper back along its creases and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. She watched me do this with those amber eyes, that same patient, assessing gaze. Then she said, I read the whole code. The transit regulation summary was only the first part. The whole thing, I said. The parts relevant to this situation, she said, with a precision that suggested she was already beginning to distinguish between reading for thoroughness and reading for application. Which is most of it, she added, but not all. I said, what did you think of it? She thought about that carefully, the way she thought about everything. She said, it is better than I expected. Most of it is written to protect people. You can tell when you read it carefully that the people who wrote it were trying to get something right. They did not always succeed, but they were trying. I looked at her for a moment. Yes, I said, that is exactly what it is. She nodded, satisfied, and went back down the corridor toward the passenger section. I stood on the manifest deck with my hand over the inside pocket of my jacket for a moment, feeling the fold of the paper through the fabric, and then I went back to the outbound load confirmations. We docked 2 hours later,